The mood going into this meeting was that the Fed was basically going to give us a hawkish hold. When you think about what we got in terms of the dot plot, what we heard from Jerome Powell in the press conference, did they achieve that?
Well, I think they succeeded in what we expected, namely delivering a hawkish skip, because they did signal very strongly that more rate hikes are coming. But the market reaction, obviously, in particular during the press conference, reversed a good deal of that. So from a market perspective, they for sure are trying to tell us that core inflation is too high, and it was emphasized several times by Jay Powell that core inflation has been too high for the last 6 months. But it's very clear that the markets are still chewing on that message and trying to figure out if that is actually also how they will be delivering things later this year.
Well, let's take a step back. Okay, we're 5 to 5 1/4 right now. This was a unanimous decision. Everyone's focused on that dot plot. 18 policymakers, 12 of them basically penciling in rates to be above basically what the market had already priced in, above the current forecast that they had, or at least from the previous dot plot. If that is the case, if those 12 members, a majority, believe that, why pause at this meeting?
I agree, it is a bit of a puzzle. And also, why call the next meeting a live meeting? He could have said much more clearly, we expect to hike rates at the next meeting. But this whole idea that time has to be straightened out before we can think about when we want to hike, in particular, with all the rate hikes in the pipeline slowing GDP growth down. If you deliver the rate hikes very late in the year, that seems very odd from the simple perspective that the rate hikes are already having a negative impact on the interest rate sensitive parts of GDP.
So then when you heard his comment about the idea of speed, the idea that they had to be speedy in starting this rate hiking cycle, the argument he seems to be making now is that you can downshift. Maybe you do something at a slower pace, but doesn't that sort of belie the whole idea about the lagged effects?
Yeah, because exactly, Romain, because as you just said, if you think that inflation is too high today, you should probably be hiking rates today. So I think that the challenge really here is to say we'll get a lot more rate hikes. There was a lot of disagreement in terms of how many more rate hikes we'll get, but basically everyone says we'll have a lot more rate hikes. And if we do get 2, 3, even 4 more rate hikes, well, if there is so much worry today, why not just hike rates today?
Well, let's talk about why they might have to keep going on this rate hiking path, even if you want to call today a skip or a pause. But I thought it was interesting. Powell said at one point that the key to getting wage inflation down is the looser labor market. And of course, the labor market resilience has been one of the mysteries, one of the really interesting parts of this cycle. When you look at that, do you see evidence that we're in a wage price spiral?
The surprise has been up to this point that the labor market is still so strong. The main reason for that is that there's still a lot of savings left that were accumulated during the pandemic. So during the pandemic, we threw $5 trillion in fiscal policy, $5 trillion expansion in Fed balance sheet, and that $10 trillion is still out there supporting consumption and therefore supporting how many people fly on airplanes, stay at hotels, go to restaurants, and therefore supporting inflation, in particular in services. He did emphasize repeatedly that service sector inflation remains just too elevated. So therefore, to your question, I think the risk going forward is that they are simply not raising rates enough compared to the stickiness in inflation that they're worried about. And therefore, the timing issue of, well, if you are so worried about inflation today, well, they should be hiking rates today. It does seem slightly odd that they therefore took a pause or a skip or whatever they did exactly today.